His hand reached toward me and the entire hall held its breath. The cold iron chains still bit into my wrists, but his eyes, those unfathomable dark eyes, held something I couldn't name. "She is mine," he declared, his voice cutting through the jeers and whispers like a blade through silk. I trembled, not from the cold that seeped through the auction floor, but from the certainty that my life had just changed forever. Before we dive into this story, leave your comment with a rating from 1 to 10 and tell us which city you're watching from. May this moment bring reflection and emotion to your heart. The cold bit into my skin like a living thing, hungry and merciless. I stood on the raised platform in the center of the auction hall, my bare feet numb against the worn wooden planks that countless others had stood upon before me. The chains around my wrists were heavy, their weight a constant reminder of what I had become. Property, merchandise, something to be bought and sold like grain or livestock. I tried to keep my breathing steady, tried to ignore the eyes that crawled over me like insects. The crowd pressed close, their bodies creating a wall of heat and sweat that contrasted sharply with the winter cold seeping through the gaps in the stone walls. Candles flickered in iron sconces, casting dancing shadows that made the faces around me look demonic, twisted with greed and cruel amusement. My name is Sarah, or at least, that's what my mother called me in the brief years I knew her. I barely remember her face now, just fragments of warmth, the scent of lavender, the feeling of safety that died the night she did. What I remember most clearly is the silver thread she pressed into my palm before the fever took her, a tarnished chain with a small pendant I couldn't quite make out in the darkness. "Keep this close," she'd whispered, her voice already fading. "It knows who you are, even when the world forgets." I was 7 years old when they told me the truth, that I was a bastard, born of a union that should never have been. My father, whoever he was, had disappeared before I drew my first breath. My mother, a servant in a noble house, had died leaving me with nothing but that pendant and a legacy of shame. The family she'd served took me in, but only as a reminder of their charity, their superiority. I learned early to make myself small, to move through rooms like a ghost, to never meet anyone's eyes directly. For 11 years, I served in the shadows of the Blackthorn Manor. I learned to polish silver until it gleamed, to scrub floors until my knees bled, to press linens with such precision that not a single wrinkle remained. I learned which hallways to avoid when Lord Blackthorn entertained his guests, which maids would share their bread when the kitchen servants forgot to feed us, which of the young masters had wandering hands and cruel laughs. Lady Blackthorn's daughters were the worst. Celeste and Margot, twins with golden hair and hearts of ice. They treated me like a toy, something to dress up and mock, to use in their games and discard when they grew bored. When they learned to read, they'd have me recite letters I'd never been taught, laughing when I stumbled. When they learned to dance, they'd force me to be their practice partner, then push me away and claim I'd soiled their dresses with my common touch. But I survived. I learned to wear silence like armor, to let their words slide off me like rain off stone. At night, in the tiny servants' quarters I shared with 3 other girls, I'd clutch my mother's pendant and imagine a different life. A life where I belonged somewhere, where I was wanted. That dream died 3 months ago. Lord Blackthorn lost a business venture, something about shipping and storms and merchants who never returned. The losses were substantial, and in his rage he looked for places to cut costs. The servant quarters, he decided, were too generous. Half of us were let go with nothing but the clothes on our backs. I was among them. With no family, no references, and a name that carried the stain of illegitimacy, I had nowhere to go. I tried the neighbouring estates, but word had spread. Blackthorn's bastard, they called me, as if my very existence was an insult to proper society. I tried the taverns, the shops, even the docks, but no one would hire a girl with no history and no protection. Winter came early that year. I sold everything I had. My spare dress, my shoes, even the ribbon that had held my hair. Everything except the silver pendant. That I could not part with, no matter how my stomach cramped with hunger or how the cold made my bones ache. I lasted 2 weeks on the streets before they found me huddled in an alley behind the market. The debt collectors, men who made their living gathering up society's refuse and selling it to the highest bidder. They grabbed me roughly, ignoring my protests, and dragged me to the holding cells beneath the city's auction house. "Pretty enough," one of them had said, tilting my face toward the light. "Bit thin, but that can be fixed. She'll fetch a decent price." I spent 3 days in that cell, surrounded by others like me, men and women who had fallen through society's cracks and landed in its darkest corners. Some wept, others raged. I simply waited, clutching my pendant beneath the thin shift they'd given me, trying to prepare myself for whatever came next. And now, here I was. The auctioneer was a short, round man with a voice that carried despite his size. He stood beside me on the platform, calling out my supposed qualities to the crowd like he was selling a horse. 18 years old, healthy, trained in household service, obedient and docile. I wanted to laugh at that last part. I wasn't obedient. I'd simply learned that resistance only brought more pain. There was a difference, though. I doubted anyone in this room cared to see it. The bidding started low. A merchant in stained clothes offered a handful of silver coins. A farmer countered with barely more. I recognized some faces in the crowd, servants from houses where I'd once delivered messages, shopkeepers who'd watched me pass their windows every day. None of them met my eyes now. Then I saw them. Celeste and Margot standing near the front with their mother, Lady Blackthorn. They wore fine wool dresses trimmed with fur, their cheeks flushed from the warmth of heated stones tucked into their pockets. Lady Blackthorn's mouth was curved in a smile that made my stomach turn. "Look how far she's fallen," I heard Celeste whisper loudly to her sister, her voice carrying in the brief lull between bids. "From our servant to someone else's slave. How fitting," Margot tittered behind her gloved hand. "Do you think we should buy her? We could use a new chambermaid now that we've sent the clumsy one away." "Why waste good money?" Lady Blackthorn replied, her voice dripping with disdain. "Let someone else deal with the bastard's curse." The words struck me like physical blows, but I kept my face blank. I'd learned long ago not to give them the satisfaction of seeing me break. The bidding continued, climbing slowly. A brothel keeper offered a sum that made several women in the crowd gasp. A mine owner countered, his face hard and calculating. I closed my eyes, trying to escape into my mind, to go somewhere far away from this moment. That's when the temperature in the room seemed to drop. At first, I thought it was my imagination, that the cold gnawing at my bones had finally reached my brain. But then I heard it, the sudden silence that fell over the crowd like a heavy blanket. The auctioneer's voice stuttered and died. Even the crackling torches seemed to dim. I opened my eyes. The crowd had parted like a river around a boulder, creating a clear path from the entrance to the platform. And walking down that path with a predator's grace and a king's authority was a man unlike any I had ever seen. He was tall, taller than any man in the room, with shoulders that seemed capable of bearing the weight of mountains. His hair was black as midnight, pulled back from a face that could have been carved from stone. High cheekbones, a strong jaw, lips pressed into a firm line. But it was his eyes that held me captive. Deep, dark eyes that seemed to see straight through flesh and bone into the hidden places where secrets dwelt. He wore black, head to toe, a long coat that moved like liquid shadow, boots that made no sound on the wooden floor despite their obvious weight. At his throat, I glimpsed a flash of silver, a chain not unlike my pendant, though far more ornate. The Alpha King. Even I, who knew nothing of politics or power, recognized him. Everyone did. He ruled the territories beyond the city, lands where old magic still lingered and ancient laws held sway. He rarely came to the city, and when he did, it was always for something important. But why was he here? Why was he at a common auction house, among merchants and farmers and brothel keepers? His gaze swept the room, and I watched as even the most arrogant nobles lowered their eyes. Lady Blackthorn actually took a step back, her face pale beneath her powder. The twins pressed close to their mother. Their earlier bravado completely vanished. Then his eyes found me. The impact was physical. My breath caught in my throat. My heart, which had been beating slowly, resigned to whatever fate awaited, suddenly thundered against my ribs. I should have looked away. Every instinct screamed at me to lower my gaze, to submit to this overwhelming presence, but I couldn't. Something held me there, frozen in the beam of his attention like a rabbit before a wolf. He moved forward, each step deliberate and unhurried. The crowd scrambled to get out of his way. When he reached the platform, he didn't climb the steps. He simply stood there, at eye, level with me despite the height difference, and spoke 2 words that changed everything. "She's mine." His voice was deep, resonant, carrying a weight that made it less a statement and more a declaration of immutable truth. The auctioneer opened his mouth perhaps to explain the bidding process, but the Alpha King's gaze shifted to him for just a moment, and the man went pale and silent. "But Your Majesty," a voice called from the crowd, "Lord Pemberton, a duke who'd never learned to keep his opinions to himself. The bidding hasn't concluded. There are proper procedures. She is mine." The Alpha King repeated, each word falling like a stone into still water. "Does anyone wish to dispute this?" Silence. Not even Lord Pemberton dared to speak again. I stood there trembling as the guards moved to unlock my chains. The iron fell away from my wrists, leaving red marks that would take days to fade. I should have felt relief, but all I felt was a different kind of terror. I'd been saved from one fate only to be claimed for another, and I had no idea which was worse. The Alpha King removed his coat, and before I could process what was happening, draped it around my shoulders. It was warm, impossibly warm, as if it had been hanging before a fire, and it smelled of pine and winter wind, and something else I couldn't name, something wild. "Come," he said quietly, his voice meant only for me. "You don't belong here." I didn't know if that was true. I didn't know where I belonged anymore. But when he turned and began walking toward the exit, I followed, because what else could I do? Behind us, the whispers started, a rising tide of shock and speculation and outrage. "Did you see the Alpha King taking a common slave? She must have bewitched him somehow. It's a scandal, an absolute scandal." Lady Blackthorn's voice rose above the others, shrill with indignation. "This is an outrage. That girl is nothing, less than nothing. She has no breeding, no value, no—" The Alpha King stopped. Slowly, deliberately, he turned his head to look back at her. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. Whatever Lady Blackthorn saw in his eyes made her stumble backward, her face going from red to white in an instant. She didn't say another word. We walked through corridors that grew wider and cleaner as we left the auction house behind. The wooden floors gave way to polished stone, the guttering torches to silver sconces with clean burning candles. I pulled the coat tighter around me, very aware of my bare feet and thin shift, of the red marks on my wrists and the tangles in my hair. Outside, a carriage waited, black lacquered wood with silver fittings, pulled by 4 massive horses that stamped their hooves impatiently. A driver sat on the box, his face carefully neutral. The Alpha King opened the door himself and gestured for me to enter. I hesitated. This was real. This was actually happening. A man I'd never met, a king whose name was spoken in whispers and warnings, had just claimed me in front of half the city's nobility. And now I was about to get into his carriage and go, "Where? To what purpose?" "I won't hurt you," he said, and something in his voice made me believe him. Not because it was gentle, it wasn't, but because it was honest. "You have my word." I climbed into the carriage. The seats were upholstered in soft leather, and there were blankets folded in the corner. The Alpha King followed, settling across from me with a grace that seemed impossible for someone his size. The driver cracked his whip and we began to move. For a long moment we sat in silence. I kept my eyes on my hands, folded in my lap, very aware of his presence across from me. He seemed to fill the entire space, though he hadn't moved or spoken. "What is your name?" he finally asked. "Sarah," I whispered, then cleared my throat and tried again. "Sarah, Your Majesty. Just Sarah? I don't have another name. My mother was a servant. My father—" I trailed off. "I know who your father was," he said, and my head snapped up so fast my vision blurred. "What?" His eyes held mine, dark and unreadable. "That pendant around your neck. May I see it?" Instinctively, my hand went to my chest, pressing the silver thread through the thin fabric of my shift. It was my mother's. "It was your father's," he corrected. "And before him it belonged to my brother." The world seemed to tilt. "I don't understand." "You will," he said. "But not tonight. Tonight you need rest, food, and safety. Tomorrow we'll talk. Tomorrow I'll tell you why I've been searching for you for 3 years. Why I've had people watching every auction house, every workhouse, every place where the lost and forgotten end up. Why finding you tonight felt like watching the stars align after centuries of waiting. I couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. This couldn't be real. This had to be some kind of dream, some fever vision born from hunger and cold and desperation. But the warmth of his coat was real. The softness of the carriage seat was real. And when he leaned forward slightly, his eyes intense and focused entirely on me, that was real too. "You are not nothing, Sarah," he said quietly. "You never were. And anyone who told you otherwise was a liar and a fool." Tears burned behind my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. I'd cried enough in my life. I'd shed enough tears for people who didn't deserve them. Instead, I clutched my mother's pendant, my father's pendant, and stared at this impossible man who'd just turned my world inside out. Why? I finally managed. "Why me?" "Because," he said, and something that might have been a smile ghosted across his severe features. "You're not just anyone. You're pack. You're family. And I protect what's mine." The carriage rolled on through the night, carrying me away from everything I'd ever known toward a future I couldn't begin to imagine. Outside, the city lights faded behind us, replaced by the darkness of open road and wild countryside. And inside, I sat wrapped in a king's coat, holding a dead woman's secret, while the man across from me watched me with eyes that promised both salvation and destruction. I didn't know which I'd get. But for the first time in longer than I could remember, I felt something other than despair. I felt alive. We traveled for hours through the darkness, the carriage swaying gently with the rhythm of the road. I must have dozed off at some point, exhausted by emotion and fear and the sudden warmth after so much cold. When I woke, there were blankets tucked around me, and the Alpha King was no longer sitting across from me. Instead, he sat beside the window, his attention on the darkness outside. "Where are we going?" I asked, my voice rough with sleep. "Home," he said simply. "My territory, my lands. And where will I be? I mean, what?" I struggled to find the words. "What happens to me now?" He turned to look at me, and in the dim light of the carriage lamp, his features seemed less harsh. "That depends on you. You're not my slave, Sarah. You're not my property. You're under my protection, and what you choose to do with that protection is your decision." "But you said I was yours." "Yes." He didn't elaborate, and I didn't press. I was too tired, too overwhelmed to push for answers I might not be ready to hear. "Can I ask you something?" I said after a moment. "Ask, why did you look for me? If you knew who I was, if you knew about my father and your brother, why wait 3 years? Why not come sooner?" His jaw tightened, the only sign that my question had struck something deep. "Because I didn't know you existed until 3 years ago. And by then, you'd already disappeared into the cracks of the city. Finding someone who doesn't want to be found, who's learned to make themselves invisible, that takes time. I wasn't hiding," I protested. "I was right there at Blackthorn Manor. Under a different name. Listed in their records as simply servant girl. No age, no family name, nothing to distinguish you from a dozen others." He shook his head. "The city is vast, and the people who fall through its cracks are numerous. But I never stopped looking. And when my sources told me about a young woman with a silver pendant being taken to the auction house," he trailed off, "I came as quickly as I could." "How did you know about the pendant?" "Because I gave it to your father 20 years ago. It was his protection, his proof of pack membership. He was supposed to come back." The Alpha King's voice hardened. "He never did. And my mother? Died protecting a secret she thought would keep you safe." He met my eyes. She was wrong. Secrets don't protect. They just delay the inevitable. I wanted to ask more about my father, about secrets, about what pack really meant. But before I could, the carriage began to slow. Through the window, I could see the first hints of dawn, painting the sky in shades of grey and silver. "We're here," the Alpha King said, and there was something in his voice. Pride, perhaps, or possession. "Welcome to Shadowmere." The carriage door opened, and I stepped out into a world that stole my breath. We stood before enormous iron gates set into stone walls that seemed to stretch endlessly in both directions. Beyond the gates, I could see a sprawling estate, buildings of dark stone and timber, their roofs peaked and sharp against the lightening sky. Forests pressed close on 3 sides, their trees ancient and thick, creating shadows even as dawn approached. But it was the house itself, no, the castle, for nothing else could describe its size and grandeur, that held my attention. It rose from the earth like something grown rather than built, its towers reaching toward the sky, its windows reflecting the dawn light, like watchful eyes. "It's beautiful," I whispered. "It's dangerous," he corrected, but his lips quirked slightly. Beautiful things often are. Guards appeared as the gates swung open, men and women in dark uniforms who saluted the Alpha King with crisp efficiency. They glanced at me with curiosity but said nothing, their training keeping their questions unspoken. We walked through courtyards where frost still clung to stone fountains, past gardens sleeping through winter under archways carved with symbols I didn't recognize. Inside, the castle was warm, heated by enormous fireplaces that burned in every room and by something else, something that seemed to emanate from the stones themselves. A woman appeared, middle-aged and stern-looking, with sharp eyes and hands that looked capable of both comfort and discipline. "Your Majesty," she said with a short bow. "We weren't expecting you back so soon." "Circumstances changed, Helena," the Alpha King gestured to me. "This is Sarah. She'll be staying with us. I want her given the blue suite, a hot bath, food, and whatever clothes will fit her. She's exhausted and I imagine quite overwhelmed." Helena's eyes swept over me, taking in my bare feet, my thin shift, the coat that hung to my knees. But unlike the crowds at the auction house, there was no cruelty in her gaze, only assessment and perhaps a hint of sympathy. "Of course, Your Majesty. Come along, child." I followed her through corridors lined with paintings and tapestries, up staircases of polished wood, past doors both open and closed. Other servants passed us, their eyes widening when they saw me, but Helena's presence kept them from stopping or staring. The blue suite was larger than any room I'd ever been in. A massive four-poster bed dominated one wall, its posts carved with intricate designs of wolves and moons. Windows looked out over the forest and I could see the sun beginning to crest the distant mountains. There were rugs on the floor, thick and soft. A fireplace already burned cheerfully. And through an open door, I could see a bathroom with a tub that could have fit 3 of me. "The bath is already being drawn," Helena said briskly. "I'll have food sent up and I'll find you something to wear. Your Majesty wants you comfortable, so don't be shy about asking for what you need." I don't understand," I said, my voice small. "Why is he doing this?" "I'm nobody. I'm just—" "You're someone he's been looking for," Helena interrupted, her voice firm but not unkind. "That makes you somebody. Now bath first. Questions later. You look like you're about to collapse." She wasn't wrong. Now that the adrenaline was fading, exhaustion pulled at me like a physical weight. I let her guide me to the bathroom, where steam rose from a tub filled with water that smelled of lavender and something else. Something clean and fresh, and utterly wonderful. "I'll leave you to it," Helena said. "Take your time. No one will disturb you." When she left, closing the door softly behind her, I stood alone in more luxury than I'd ever seen. Slowly, carefully, I removed the Alpha King's coat, folding it reverently and placing it on a nearby chair. Then I slipped out of the thin shift and stepped into the water. The heat was almost painful at first, attacking my cold-numbed skin with thousands of needles. But as I sank deeper, as the water rose to my shoulders and then my chin, the pain faded into pure bliss. I couldn't remember the last time I'd been truly warm. Couldn't remember the last time I'd felt clean. I don't know how long I stayed in that tub. Long enough for the water to cool slightly. Long enough for my fingers to prune. Long enough for tears to finally come. Tears I'd held back through fear and shame and desperate hope. I cried quietly, my face pressed into my drawn-up knees, letting the water muffle my sobs. When I finally emerged, I found a thick robe waiting, along with soft slippers that fit reasonably well. In the main room, a tray of food had been left on a small table by the fireplace, bread still warm from the oven, cheese, sliced fruit, and soup that smelled like heaven. I ate slowly, savoring each bite, trying not to make myself sick by eating too quickly after so long with little food. Clothes had been laid out on the bed. A simple dress in dark blue, undergarments, warm stockings, Everything fit surprisingly well, as if someone had guessed my measurements with uncanny accuracy. As I dressed, I caught sight of myself in a full-length mirror and barely recognized my own reflection. I looked almost presentable. My hair, still damp from the bath, hung in dark waves past my shoulders. The dress, while simple, was well made and clean. The red marks on my wrists were already fading. I looked like someone who might belong in a place like this, but I knew better. I was still the bastard, still the girl with no name and no family. Pretty clothes and a warm bath couldn't change that. A knock on the door made me jump. "Come in," I called, expecting Helena. Instead, the Alpha King entered. He'd changed as well, trading his travel clothes for more casual attire, dark pants, a white shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows. His hair was loose now, falling to his shoulders in thick waves. Without the formal coat and the aura of raw power he'd projected in the auction house, he looked younger, more human. "I hope you're comfortable," he said, his eyes sweeping the room as if to ensure everything was to his satisfaction. "More than comfortable," I admitted. It's too much. I don't deserve—" "Stop." The word was gentle but firm. "I don't want to hear you say what you don't deserve. You deserve safety. You deserve comfort. You deserve to be treated with respect. These are baseline requirements, not rewards to be earned." I didn't know what to say to that. No one had ever spoken to me like this before, like I mattered, like my comfort was worth considering. He moved to the window, his hands clasped behind his back as he looked out at the dawn-lit forest. "I promised you answers," he said, "and I keep my promises. But I need to know first, are you strong enough for this conversation? Or would you prefer to rest and talk later?" "Now," I said immediately. "Please, I need to understand what's happening." He nodded and turned to face me. In the morning light streaming through the window, his eyes seemed less black and more a deep brown, like earth after rain. "Your father's name was Marcus. He was my brother's closest friend, his beta, his second in command. 20 years ago, there was a war. A challenge to our territory from a rival pack. Marcus fought beside my brother, and when my brother fell, Marcus carried his body from the battlefield." I listened, barely breathing. "After the war, Marcus disappeared. We thought he'd been killed, his body lost or taken. We mourned him as we mourned all our fallen. But then, 17 years later, I received a letter. It was from a woman named Eleanor, your mother. She told me that Marcus had survived the war but had been badly injured. He'd made his way to the city where she found him and nursed him back to health. They fell in love. She became pregnant with you." "Why didn't he come back?" I asked. "If he survived, why didn't he return here?" "Because he'd lost something in that war, something essential to our kind." The Alpha King's expression was grave. "His wolf, the bond that connects us to our primal nature, that gives us our strength and longevity. Without it, he was just a man. A strong man still, but no longer pack. He thought—" The Alpha King paused, choosing his words carefully. "He thought he would be a burden, that his weakness would shame his memory." "That's stupid," I said before I could stop myself, then clapped my hand over my mouth. But the Alpha King smiled, a real smile that transformed his face. "Yes," he agreed, "it was. But pride makes fools of us all. By the time your mother's letter reached me, both she and Marcus were dead, and you had vanished." "The pendant," I said, my hand going to my neck. "That's how you knew it was me." "The pendant was my brother's. When he died, I gave it to Marcus as a reminder that he would always be pack, always be family. Marcus must have given it to your mother before he died, hoping it would protect you." The Alpha King moved closer, his eyes intense. "Do you know what you are, Sarah? A bastard? An orphan? You are the child of a beta. You carry pack blood, diluted perhaps, but present. That pendant didn't just identify you, it's been protecting you, keeping you safe from detection by those who might have used your heritage against you." My head spun. "I don't understand any of this. Wolves, packs, what are you talking about?" "I'm talking about what we are. What your father was. What you are, at least in part." He held my gaze. "We are the children of the old blood, Sarah. We can walk in two skins, human and wolf. We live longer, heal faster, and are bound to each other by ties stronger than any human family. And you, whether you feel it or not, are part of that legacy." I sat down heavily on the edge of the bed. You're saying you're a werewolf? That my father was a werewolf? Not were, he corrected. We don't become wolves. We are wolves. It's not a curse or a disease. It's what we've always been, since before humans built their first cities. This is insane. Is it? He challenged. Is it any more insane than believing you were nothing, that you deserve to be sold like cattle? You've spent your whole life knowing you didn't quite fit, haven't you? Knowing there was something different about you, something that set you apart? I wanted to deny it, but I couldn't. He was right. I'd always felt like I was wearing a costume that didn't quite fit, playing a role that wasn't meant for me. What does this mean for me? I asked quietly. What happens now? Now you live, you heal, you learn who you really are. He moved to the door, then paused. And you decide if you want to stay or leave. I won't force you to be here, Sarah. But while you're under my roof, you're under my protection. No one will hurt you. No one will shame you. No one will make you feel less than what you are. And what am I? I whispered. He looked back at me, and his eyes held something fierce and protective and utterly certain. Your pack, he said. You're mine. And I take care of what's mine. Then he was gone, the door closing softly behind him, leaving me alone with revelations that should have been impossible but felt, somehow, like the first true things anyone had ever told me. I lay back on the enormous bed, staring up at the canopy above me, my mother's pendant, my father's pendant, pressed against my chest. Outside, I could hear birds beginning their morning songs. Somewhere in the castle, people were moving about, starting their day. And I was here in a place that shouldn't exist, claimed by a man who said I was family. For the first time in my life, I let myself hope that might be true, but I also knew that nothing came without a price. And I was very aware that I had yet to learn what staying here would cost me. The days that followed blurred together in a strange mixture of luxury and uncertainty. Helena proved to be my constant companion, showing me around the castle, teaching me the routines, introducing me to the other inhabitants with a firmness that discouraged questions. The servants treated me with cautious respect, and I couldn't tell if it was because of the Alpha King's protection or because they sensed something in me that I didn't understand yet. The castle itself was massive, with more rooms than I could count. Libraries filled with books I'd never learned to read properly. Training rooms where I glimpsed men and women moving with inhuman grace and speed. Gardens that somehow bloomed even in winter, their flowers defying the season. And everywhere the sense of eyes watching me, not hostile but curious, assessing. The Alpha King gave me space. He didn't summon me or demand my presence. But I saw him, often from a distance, moving through his domain with that same predatory grace that had first caught my attention. Sometimes I'd catch him looking at me, his expression unreadable, before he'd turn away and continue whatever business occupied a king. On the fourth day, Helena brought me a letter. From His Majesty, she said, setting it on the breakfast tray. He requests your presence in his study this afternoon if you're willing. Requests, not demands. I appreciated that. I'll go, I said. Helena nodded, satisfied, and left me to finish my breakfast. I looked at the letter, heavy paper, sealed with wax bearing the impression of a wolf's head. With trembling fingers, I broke the seal and unfolded it. The handwriting was bold and clear. Sarah, I thought you might appreciate understanding more about your heritage. There are books in my study that might help. Journals from your father, histories of our people. If you wish to read them, I'll make them available to you. The choice, as always, is yours. Kyle. The Alpha King had a name and he'd signed it like we were. What, friends? I didn't know what we were, but I wanted to know more, needed to know more. That afternoon, dressed in one of the simple but well-made dresses that had somehow appeared in my wardrobe, I made my way to his study. The door was open, and I knocked softly on the frame. Come in, his voice called. The study was smaller than I'd expected, warmer. Books lined the walls from floor to ceiling, their spines worn with use. A large desk dominated one side of the room covered in papers and maps. And in front of the fireplace, two comfortable chairs faced each other across a low table. Kyle rose from one of the chairs, and I was struck again by how different he seemed here than he had in the auction house. Less like a king, more like a man who read too much and slept too little. "Thank you for coming," he said, gesturing to the other chair. "Please sit." I sat, tucking my feet under me nervously. On the table between us was a stack of leather-bound journals. "These were your father's," Kyle said, his hand resting on the topmost journal. He was meticulous about recording his thoughts, his experiences. I thought you might want to know who he was. Not just as my brother's beta, but as a person. I reached out, my fingers brushing the worn leather. "May I?" "They're yours. Everything of his that survived, everything we kept. It's all yours now." I opened the first journal carefully, aware that I was holding something precious. The handwriting inside was neat, precise, with occasional sketches in the margins. I began to read. "Today we ran the northern border. The scent of pine is stronger there, and the streams run cold and clear. It reminds me why we fight to protect this land, not for power or pride, but because it's ours, because it's home." "He wrote like a poet," I murmured. He was, in his way. Kyle leaned back in his chair. Marcus saw beauty in things others overlooked. It made him an excellent scout because he noticed details, but it also made him vulnerable. To what? To feeling, to caring. Kyle's eyes were distant. When he lost his wolf, he didn't just lose his strength. He lost his connection to the pack, to the land, to everything that defined him. It broke something in him. Your mother helped him find a new purpose, a new reason to exist. But the wound never fully healed. I continued reading, page after page of my father's thoughts and observations. He wrote about pack life, about hunts and battles and quiet moments by the fire. He wrote about loyalty and duty and love. And near the end of the last journal, the one that must have been from his final years, the entries grew shorter, more melancholic. "I dream of running again, of feeling the wind through fur, of tasting the freedom of the hunt. But that life is behind me now. I've found a different kind of happiness, quieter, gentler, but real. Elena makes me believe I can be more than what I've lost." And then, in the very last entry, written in a shakier hand, "She's pregnant. Our daughter will be born in spring. I pray she has her mother's spirit and none of my broken pieces. I pray she never knows the weight of being split between two worlds." Tears blurred my vision. I set the journal down carefully and wiped my eyes. "He loved you," Kyle said softly. "Even though he never met you, he loved you." "And my mother? Did you ever meet her?" "Once. After I received her letter, I went to the city. But by then, she was already sick, the fever that would eventually take her. She made me promise that I'd find you, that I'd protect you. She said you were innocent of all the sins that had marked your parents' lives." Kyle's expression was pained. "I failed that promise. For 3 years, I failed. You found me eventually. Not soon enough. You suffered because I wasn't fast enough, smart enough." "Stop," I interrupted, echoing his own words from days before. "You can't blame yourself for choices other people made. Lady Blackthorn threw me out. Lord Blackthorn let me go. The debt collectors took me. None of that was your fault." He looked at me for a long moment, and I saw something shift in his eyes. "You're stronger than you know," he said quietly. "I'm really not. I'm just stubborn. There's a difference." That surprised a laugh out of him, a real laugh, warm and genuine. "Stubborn. Yes, I can see that. Marcus was stubborn too. And my brother, God, you never met a more stubborn wolf in your life. Tell me about him, your brother." And he did. For the next hour, as the afternoon sun slanted through the windows and the fire crackled softly, Kyle told me stories. About his brother Finn, who'd been alpha before him. About the pack that had thrived under Finn's leadership. About the war that had taken so many lives and changed so many more. "I never wanted to be alpha," Kyle admitted. "That was always Finn's destiny. I was happy being his enforcer, his sword. But when he fell, the pack needed someone to hold them together. So I became what they needed, even if it meant burying who I was." "And who were you?" "Someone who liked books more than politics. Who preferred a quiet evening to a grand feast. Who wanted..." He trailed off. "Wanted what?" He met my eyes, and in them I saw an unexpected vulnerability. To be chosen. Not because of my title or my strength, but because of who I was. Just myself. The confession hung between us, intimate and raw. I understood it better than he probably knew. Wasn't that what I'd always wanted too? To be seen as more than a bastard, more than a servant? To be chosen simply for being me? Thank you, I said. For the journals, for the stories, for everything. You're welcome. He stood and I realized our time was ending. Sarah, there's something I need to tell you. Tomorrow there's a gathering. Other pack leaders will be coming to discuss territory borders and trade agreements. It's formal, political, and generally tedious, but they'll want to meet you. Why would they want to meet me? Because you're pack now. Because your father was respected and his daughter returning is significant. And because, he added with a slight smile, I claimed you in front of half the city. Word has spread. They'll be curious. Fear curled in my stomach. I don't know how to behave at formal gatherings. I was always in the kitchens or the servants' quarters. I don't know the right forks or the proper greetings or... You know how to be yourself, Kyle interrupted. That's all I ask. Be honest, be brave. Be the woman who stood on that auction platform with her head high even when the world tried to break her. He paused. Besides, Helena is going to teach you the basics tomorrow morning. She's terrifyingly efficient. Despite my fear, I smiled. She is that. Then you'll do fine. He walked me to the door. Get some rest. Tomorrow will be challenging, but you won't face it alone. That night, I lay in my enormous bed with my father's journals stacked on the nightstand. I'd read them all now, cover to cover, learning about a man I'd never known but felt connected to through every word he'd written. He'd been lonely. He'd been lost. But he'd also been capable of great love and fierce loyalty. I reached for my pendant, holding it up to catch the firelight. Silver gleamed. And for the first time, I noticed tiny inscriptions along the chain, symbols I couldn't read but that somehow felt familiar. Like a language I'd once known and forgotten. I'm here, Father, I whispered to the empty room. I don't know if I'm what you hoped I'd be, but I'm trying. I'm trying to be brave. The pendant seemed to warm in my hand, though that was probably just my imagination. Outside, I heard a howl, long and mournful and beautiful. Another answered it, then another, until the night was filled with a chorus of wild voices. For the first time, I didn't find the sound frightening. I found it like coming home. Morning came too quickly, bringing with it a level of chaos I wasn't prepared for. Helena swept into my room like a force of nature, followed by two younger women carrying armfuls of fabric. Up, 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 Helena commanded. We have work to do. The next several hours were a blur of measurements, fittings, and instructions delivered in Helena's no-nonsense tone. The dress they'd chosen for the gathering was deep burgundy, elegant but not overly fancy, with long sleeves and a neckline that was modest without being prudish. You'll wear your hair up, Helena declared, already pulling my dark waves into an intricate arrangement. Shows off your neck, makes you look confident. I don't feel confident. Fake it. Half of being confident is pretending you are until it becomes true. She pinned the last strand and stepped back to assess her work. Now let's go over the basics. When you're introduced, you incline your head slightly. Not a bow, you're not a servant anymore, just an acknowledgement. If someone extends their hand, you take it briefly. Don't grip too hard or too soft. Meet their eyes, but don't stare. And for heaven's sake, if you don't know what to say, smile politely and say nothing. That's a lot of rules. Welcome to pack politics. Helena's expression softened slightly. You'll do fine, child. His Majesty wouldn't be putting you through this if he didn't think you could handle it. The gathering was held in the Great Hall, a massive room with vaulted ceilings and enormous windows that looked out over the forest. Long tables had been set up, laden with food and drink. Pack members mingled, their conversations a low hum of sound that filled the space. I entered with Kyle at my side, his hand resting lightly on my lower back, a gesture that seemed both protective and possessive. Conversations died as people noticed us, heads turning, eyes assessing. Breathe, Kyle murmured. You're doing great. I took a steadying breath and tried to project the confidence Helena had talked about. The gathered pack members were not what I'd expected. They looked human, but there was something about them. A grace in how they moved, an intensity in their eyes, an awareness that went beyond normal human perception. Kyle led me through the room, introducing me to what felt like dozens of people. There was Marcus's old patrol partner, a grizzled man named Thomas who gripped my hand firmly and said, "You have your father's eyes." There was Elaine, The pack healer, who studied me with professional interest and asked if I'd ever had any unusual illnesses. There was Daniel, one of the younger alphas from a neighboring territory, who looked at me with barely concealed curiosity. And then there was Victoria. She glided across the room like a predator, beautiful in a way that seemed almost unreal. Golden hair, perfect features, a figure that the expensive silk dress showed to full advantage. She stopped in front of us, her smile not quite reaching her ice-blue eyes. "Kyle," she purred. "I heard rumors you'd brought someone back from the city. I didn't believe them until now." "Victoria." Kyle's tone was carefully neutral. "This is Sarah. Sarah, this is Victoria, Alpha of the Eastern Ridge Territory." "Charmed," Victoria said, her gaze raking over me in a way that made me feel like I was back on the auction platform. "So you're Marcus's daughter? How interesting." There was something in the way she said interesting that made it sound like an insult. "I understand you and he were quite close," Victoria continued, looking at Kyle now. "Before he abandoned the pack, that is." "He didn't abandon anyone," I said before I could stop myself. "He was injured. He lost—" I caught myself remembering these were pack members. They would know what losing a wolf meant. Victoria's smile sharpened. "Ah, so she has spirit. How delightful." She turned to Kale. "I do hope you're not planning to formalize anything with this. What exactly is her status? Not pack, surely." "Not fully." "She's under my protection," Kyle said, his voice dropping to a tone that made several nearby conversations stop. "That makes her pack." "Protection," Victoria repeated the word like she was testing it. "How generous of you. Though I wonder what the council will think about you claiming a half-blood with no training, no control, no—" "Enough." Kyle's single word cut through her monologue like a blade. "Sarah is here as my guest. You will treat her with respect." "Of course, my king." Victoria's smile was poisonous. "I meant no offense. I'm simply concerned about pack integrity. These are dangerous times. We can't afford to show weakness." She glided away, leaving a wake of tension behind her. I realized my hands were clenched into fists, my nails digging into my palms. "Don't let her get to you," Kyle said quietly. "Victoria's complicated. Were you two—" I couldn't quite finish the question. "No. But she wanted us to be." I refused. "She didn't take it well." He guided me toward a quieter corner of the hall. "She's powerful, influential, and unfortunately not entirely wrong about the council's concerns." "The council?" "The ruling body of pack leaders. They advise me, but they also have the power to challenge my decisions if they believe I'm acting against pack interests." He handed me a glass of wine from a passing servant's tray. "Taking in a half-blood, someone with pack heritage but no wolf, is unusual." "Then why did you do it?" He looked at me, really looked at me, and in his eyes I saw something I couldn't quite name. "Because it was right. Because you're family. And because—" He paused. "Because when I saw you on that platform, cold and afraid but still unbowed, I knew you were stronger than any full-blooded wolf who'd never faced real hardship." Pretty words. "Your Majesty." The unfamiliar voice made us both turn. An older man approached, his hair grey but his frame still powerful. Authority radiated from him like heat from a forge. "Councillor Edmund," Kyle acknowledged with a slight nod. "I've been hearing fascinating things about your recent trip to the city," Edmund's eyes fixed on me. "Marcus's daughter. I remember your father well, good man. Tragic what happened to him." "Thank you," I said, not sure what else to say. "Tell me, girl, do you know what you are? Has anyone explained pack law to you? Your rights? Your limitations?" "I'm learning," I said carefully. "Learning." Edmund made a thoughtful sound. "His Majesty has taken quite a risk bringing you here. There are those who believe half-bloods are a dilution of our bloodline, that protecting them weakens us." "And what do you believe?" I asked, lifting my chin. Edmund's eyebrows rose. "Bold. I like that." He glanced at Kale. "I believe that strength comes from more than bloodlines. I've seen full-blooded wolves who were cowards and half-bloods who showed more courage than any alpha. The measure of a person isn't in their heritage, but in their actions." "Then perhaps," I said, my voice steady despite my racing heart, "you should judge me by my actions rather than my blood." A smile curved Edmund's lips. "Perhaps I should." Welcome to Shadowmere, Sarah. I suspect you'll shake things up quite nicely. He moved away and I realized I was trembling. Kyle's hand settled on my shoulder, warm and grounding. That was well done, he said. I probably shouldn't have been so direct with a counselor. No, you were perfect. Edmund respects strength. You showed him you won't be cowed, even by someone with power. Kyle's thumb brushed against my shoulder blade, a small gesture that sent unexpected warmth through me. You're doing better than I ever could have hoped. The rest of the gathering passed in a blur of introductions and careful conversations. Not everyone was as hostile as Victoria or as accepting as Edmund. Some were curious, others wary, a few openly skeptical. But I held my head high, remembered Helena's instructions, and tried to project the confidence I didn't quite feel. By the time the last guests departed, I was exhausted, mentally, emotionally, physically. Kyle walked me back to my rooms, his presence solid and reassuring beside me. You survived your first pack gathering, he said as we reached my door. That's no small feat. Victoria hates me. Victoria hates that she can't control me. You're just the current focus of that frustration. He leaned against the doorframe. Don't let her poison your mind. You belong here, do I? The question burst out before I could stop it. Everyone here has something I don't. Power, status, they're wolf. What do I bring? Why am I really here, Kyle? He was quiet for a long moment, his eyes searching mine. You're here because you're supposed to be. I can't explain it better than that. From the moment I saw you, something in me recognized something in you. Like calls to like even when the connection isn't obvious. That doesn't make sense. Pack bonds rarely do. They just are. He straightened, and I thought he might leave, but instead he lifted his hand, his fingers brushing the pendant at my throat. This protected you for 18 years. It kept you hidden from those who might have used your heritage for their own purposes. But now that you're here, safe, you don't need to hide anymore. I don't know how to be anything but hidden. Then learn. His fingers trailed from the pendant to my cheek. The touch feather light and gone too quickly. Learn to be seen, Sarah. You might be surprised by what you find. He left me then, closing the door softly behind him. I stood there for a long moment, my hand pressed to my cheek where his fingers had been, my heart doing complicated things in my chest. I should have been thinking about Victoria's hostility, about the council's scrutiny, about all the ways this could go wrong. Instead, I was thinking about how Cale looked at me, how he touched me like I was something precious, how his presence made me feel safe and terrified in equal measure. I changed out of the burgundy dress and into a nightgown, then sat by the window looking out at the forest. Moonlight painted the trees in silver, and somewhere in those shadows I knew wolves ran free. Part of me envied them, their certainty, their belonging, their complete acceptance of who and what they were. And part of me wondered if I could ever find that same acceptance, if I could ever truly belong anywhere. The silver pendant warmed against my skin and I closed my eyes, pretending that somewhere, somehow, my father could hear me. I'm trying, Father, I whispered. I'm trying to be brave, but I'm so scared of failing, of being found wanting, of losing this before I even understand what it is. No answer came. But in the distance, a wolf howled, long and low and achingly beautiful. And for just a moment, something in my chest responded to that call. Something I'd never felt before. Something wild and hungry and utterly alive. I didn't know what it meant, but I knew with absolute certainty that my life would never be simple again.